She grabbed a stranger's arm in broad daylight and whispered 4 words that changed everything. "Please pretend to be my brother." Her hands were trembling. Her eyes never stopped moving. And Officer Caleb Vance, who had faced armed suspects and dark alleyways, felt something cold crawl up the back of his neck the moment he looked into her face. Because she wasn't scared of a stranger. She was scared of the men already watching her from across the park. If you've never subscribed to this channel, do it right now. Drop the name of your city in the comments so I can see just how far this story has traveled. Let's begin. The morning had been quiet. Almost too quiet. Caleb Vance had been on the force for 3 years, long enough to know that quiet never lasted, and short enough that he still noticed when something felt off. He was sitting on a bench near the center of Grover Park, finishing the last of a lukewarm coffee while Rex worked the open grass nearby. Rex was a 4-year-old German Shepherd, 92 pounds of muscle and instinct, currently investigating a patch of clover like it personally offended him. Caleb watched him and almost smiled. Almost. Because that was when he heard the footsteps. Not walking, running. The kind of running that had nothing to do with exercise. She came around the corner of the pavilion so fast she nearly lost her footing on the gravel path. Early 30s, maybe. Dark hair pulled back unevenly like she'd done it in a hurry or hadn't been able to look in a mirror in days. She was wearing a gray cardigan over a floral dress, and her left sleeve was pushed up past her elbow, exposing a bruise the shape of a handprint that she hadn't bothered to hide. She saw Caleb before he could stand up. She crossed the distance between them in 4 steps and grabbed his arm with both hands, and the grip was desperate, the grip of someone who had already run out of options. "Please," she whispered. "Please, I need you to pretend to be my brother, just for a few minutes, please." Caleb set the coffee down slowly. "Ma'am, I'm a police officer. You don't need me to pretend anything." "No." Her eyes snapped to his badge, and then up to his face, and something complicated moved through her expression. "No, you don't understand. If they see a cop, they'll leave. But then they'll come back tonight, and it'll be worse. I just need someone they don't recognize. I need someone who looks like he belongs with me, please." Rex had stopped investigating the clover. He was standing perfectly still 30 feet away, ears forward, every line of his body locked onto the woman in front of Caleb. Caleb noticed. "Who's coming?" he asked quietly. She glanced over her shoulder. Her breath caught. "They're already here." Caleb didn't turn immediately. He'd learned a long time ago that the moment you look is the moment you give away what you know. He watched her face instead, watched the way her jaw tightened, and her nostrils flared with a breath she was trying to control, and he counted to 2 before he let his eyes drift casually to the left, like a man looking at nothing in particular. 3 men, coming through the east entrance of the park. The one in the front was older, maybe late 60s, silver-haired, wearing a pressed button-down shirt, like he'd come from somewhere important. He walked with the deliberate patience of a man who had never once been told no and expected that to continue. The 2 behind him were younger. Bigger. They weren't wearing uniforms, but they moved like they were used to being the enforcement in any room they entered. "Your name?" Caleb said, still watching them from the corner of his eye. "Elena. Elena Marsh." "And the man in front?" A pause. 1 breath. 2. "Walter Cross. My late husband's father." The word late landed between them like a stone dropped into still water. Caleb looked at her, then really looked at her, and she met his gaze with the steadiness of a woman who had already spent a long time trying not to fall apart, and had gotten very good at it. "How long?" he asked. "Daniel died 14 months ago." She swallowed. "Walter never approved of me. But when Daniel was alive, there were limits. After the funeral..." She stopped, started again. "There are no more limits." Rex made a sound. Not a bark. Not quite a growl. Something low and deliberate in the back of his throat, and Caleb had worked with him long enough to understand what that meant. Pay attention. Something is wrong here. Elena, Caleb said quietly, I need you to sit down next to me right now, and I need you to look like you've been expecting me. She sat, her hands folded in her lap with the careful precision of someone managing panic with everything she had. Walter Cross reached the bench in under a minute. He stopped a few feet away, and his expression was the most dangerous kind of expression that Caleb had ever encountered in his work. It was warm. It was patient. It was the expression of a man who was absolutely certain he was going to win. Elena, sweetheart. His voice was smooth, the kind of smooth that took decades to practice. We've been looking everywhere for you. You didn't answer your phone. Elena didn't look at him. She looked at her hands. I left it at home. You worried me. He said it like concern, but his eyes moved to Caleb, and the warmth in them shifted just slightly the way a fire shifts when someone opens a window. I'm sorry. I don't believe we've met. Caleb leaned back on the bench like a man with nowhere to be. Caleb Vance, Elena's brother. Something moved across Walter Cross's face. It was fast, and he controlled it fast, but Caleb caught it. Surprise. And underneath the surprise, something that sharpened immediately into calculation. I wasn't aware Elena had a brother, Walter said. Half-brother, Caleb said. Different dad. We don't advertise it. A silence stretched between them. One of the men behind Walter shifted his weight. Caleb didn't acknowledge it. He kept his eyes on Walter and kept his posture easy because he'd learned in the academy and reinforced every single day on the job that the first person to show tension is the first person to lose ground. Walter looked at Elena. Elena, why don't you come back to the house? You can bring your brother along. We'll have lunch. We'll talk. She's good here, Caleb said. I wasn't speaking to you. I know. Caleb let a beat pass. She's still good here. One of the men behind Walter took a step forward. Rex moved at the same moment, not running, not lunging, just repositioning himself with the fluid certainty of an animal that knows exactly what it's doing, placing himself between the approaching man and the bench with 4 quiet steps that somehow communicated an entire encyclopedia of warning. The man stopped. Walter looked at the dog. Something in his composure shifted just at the edges. Beautiful animal, he said. He thinks so too, Caleb said. Elena. Walter's voice dropped, the warmth thinning to something else underneath something with edges. You know this isn't what Daniel would have wanted. You know he trusted me to take care of you. We had an understanding, you and I. Elena's hands tightened in her lap. Caleb felt it more than saw it, the way the air changed when someone is holding back something enormous. And then she spoke. Her voice was quiet, almost steady. Daniel is gone, Walter. Yes, Walter said. And what he left behind belongs to this family. The words hit the air and sat there. Caleb didn't move. He didn't look at Elena. He kept his eyes on Walter Cross and filed every single thing away. The phrasing, the certainty, the possessive weight behind the word belongs. And he understood in the specific way that 3 years of police work teaches you to understand things. That this was not a grieving grandfather worried about his daughter-in-law. This was a man who believed he owned something he hadn't been given. I think, Caleb said, his voice still easy, that Elena's going to stay here with me today. And who exactly are you to make that determination? Walter asked. The patience in his voice had developed a fracture line barely visible, but there. Today, Caleb met his eyes. Her brother. The silence this time was different, heavier. Rex had not moved. He was sitting perfectly still beside the bench now, and his eyes were fixed on the man who had stepped forward and then stopped, and that man was not moving again. Walter Cross studied Caleb for a long moment. He was the kind of man who knew how to read people who had spent years in rooms where knowing the weight of your opponent was the only thing that mattered, and Caleb could feel him doing it, could feel the assessment being made, the calculation being run. And Caleb let him look. Because there was nothing in Caleb's face to give him anything useful, and that in its own way was an answer. Walter straightened his collar. He took one slow breath and then smiled, and the smile was the most unsettling thing he'd done yet because it was patient. "It was nice meeting you, Caleb," he said. "I'm sure we'll see each other again soon." He turned and walked back toward the east entrance, and his 2 men fell in behind him without a word. And in under 2 minutes, the 3 of them were gone. Elena's breath came out of her in a rush, like she'd been holding it since before they arrived. Caleb didn't say anything right away. He gave her a moment, and he watched Rex watch the direction Walter had gone, and he waited until the dog's posture finally eased before he spoke. "Tell me everything," he said. "From the beginning. Leave nothing out." She looked at him. Her eyes were wet at the edges, but hadn't spilled over, and in that moment, Caleb thought she might be one of the strongest people he'd met in a very long time. "You're actually a police officer," she said. "Yes. And you helped me anyway, even knowing they might come back." "Especially knowing they might come back." Something in her face shifted. Not relief exactly. Something quieter and more fragile than that, like a door opening in a room that had been locked for a very long time. She looked down at the bruise on her wrist. She didn't cover it this time. "Daniel died in a car accident," she said. "That's the official story. That's what Walter paid very good money to make the official story." The park was quiet around them. Rex had come to rest beside her foot, warm and still. And she looked down at him, and then back at Caleb, and her voice when she spoke again was barely above a whisper. "I was in the car." The words landed like a fist to the chest. Caleb didn't move. He didn't reach for his notepad, didn't shift into official posture, didn't do any of the things that training told him to do when a witness said something that cracked a case wide open. He just sat there very still and let the weight of what she'd said settle between them. "You were in the car," he repeated. "Yes. And you walked away." "I walked away." Her voice was flat, the flatness of someone who had already spent 14 months being haunted by exactly that fact. "Daniel didn't. The police said it was a wet road, a curve he took too fast, driver error. Case closed in 11 days. 11 days is fast. Walter Cross has a lot of friends in this county." She said it without bitterness, which somehow made it worse. Pure, exhausted fact. "He sat across from me at Daniel's funeral and held my hand in front of everyone. And when the last guest left, he told me that if I ever spoke about what happened in that car, he would make sure I didn't get the opportunity to speak about anything ever again." Rex shifted beside her foot. She looked down at him, and her hand moved almost involuntarily, her fingers finding the top of his head, and the dog leaned into the touch without being asked. Caleb watched that and felt something firm up inside him. "What happened in that car, Elena?" She looked up. Her jaw worked for a moment. "Daniel told me something 3 days before he died. He'd been acting different for weeks, distracted, not sleeping, and I kept asking him what was wrong, and he kept saying it was work. And then 3 days before the accident, he came home at 2 in the morning and sat down at the kitchen table and said, 'Elena, I need you to listen to me, and I need you to believe me.'" She stopped. "And?" Caleb kept his voice even, almost gentle. "He told me his father had been falsifying medical records. Walter owns 3 senior care facilities in this county. Has for 20 years. Daniel worked in the financial division of the family business, and he'd found transactions that didn't make sense money, moving in ways that only made sense if someone was billing Medicare for treatments that were never given and billing families for medications that patients never received." She paused. "Hundreds of patients, Caleb. Maybe more. Over more than a decade." The air between them changed. "Daniel had documentation," she continued. "He'd been quietly copying files for months. He told me he was going to take everything to the Federal Medical Fraud Division the following week. He'd already made contact with someone there." She pressed her lips together. "He never got the chance." Caleb leaned forward, elbows on his knees, and looked at the grass between his feet for exactly 3 seconds while he put the architecture of it together in his mind. Then he looked back at her. The documentation. Where is it? The question hit her like a wave she hadn't been braced for. Something moved across her face, quick and complicated, and then she looked away. I don't know. Elena. I don't know where he put it. He told me he had it somewhere safe and he'd show me after he made the call. He said it was better if I didn't know yet in case anyone asked me. She exhaled. He was trying to protect me, and 2 days later he was dead, and I had nothing, and Walter walked into my life like he owned it, because as far as the county records were concerned, he did. What does that mean? Daniel's share of the business and the family property were left to me in his will. Walter contested it within 30 days of the funeral. Said Daniel wasn't of sound mind when he made the changes, said there was a prior document that superseded it. Brought in 3 lawyers who I'm certain he was paying. Her voice tightened. I had 1 lawyer. A good one. But he withdrew from the case 4 months in. Told me he'd received information that made it impossible for him to continue representing me. He wouldn't tell me what the information was. Caleb felt the shape of it. The slow, methodical pressure of a man who didn't need to be loud because he'd spent a lifetime making sure the system worked for him. So you ran, Caleb said. I didn't run. She said it with a quiet fierceness that surprised him. I retreated. There's a difference. I've been staying with a friend 3 counties over trying to find someone who would listen, trying to find whatever Daniel hid. And last week I got a phone call from a number I didn't recognize. She stopped. What did they say? They said we found it. Come to this address alone and we'll give you everything. Caleb's jaw tightened. Please tell me you didn't go. I almost did. She said it quietly, almost ashamed. I was so desperate. 14 months of nothing and someone calls and says they have it, and I almost went alone to an address I'd never heard of, like everything inside me that was supposed to protect me had just shut down. She shook her head. I called the number back the next morning to confirm, and a man answered who was not the same voice as the night before. I hung up. And then you came back here. I had nowhere else to go. My friend's apartment, Walter knows about it now. I found out 3 days ago that someone had been watching the building. I grabbed what I could carry, and I drove here. She looked at Caleb with something that was almost desperate in its honesty. I don't know why I stopped in this park. I just needed to sit down for a minute and think, and then I saw them coming through the gate, and you were just there. Caleb looked at her for a long moment. Then he stood up. Okay, he said. She blinked. Okay. You're not going back to your car alone. You're not going back to your friend's place, and you're not talking to anyone else about this today. He pulled out his phone. I'm going to make 2 calls. The first one is to someone I trust at the county level who is not connected to Walter Cross's network. The second is to my sergeant who is going to think I've lost my mind. Despite everything, something flickered at the corner of her mouth. Not quite a smile. Almost. Have you lost your mind? Possibly. He held the phone and looked at her directly. But I was in the car with my dad when I was 9 years old, and a truck ran a red light and walked away from it, and he didn't, and nobody in that investigation ever asked me what I saw. He said it simply, without drama, the way a person states something they've carried long enough that it no longer bleeds when they touch it. So no, I'm not walking away from this. She stared at him. Rex looked up at both of them like he'd been following the conversation and had already made his decision. Caleb made the first call. His contact at the county clerk's office was a woman named Daria Whitmore, who had worked there for 18 years and had, in Caleb's experience, the sharpest memory and the lowest tolerance for being played of anyone he'd ever met. Daria, it's Caleb Vance. I need you to quietly pull something for me. How quietly? Ghost quiet. Nothing logged, nothing visible. I'll explain later. A pause. This about Walter Cross. Caleb went very still. Why would you say that name? Because you're the second person in 2 weeks who's called me and danced around it without saying it directly. The first one was a federal investigator who identified herself and then asked me to pretend she'd never called. Another pause. Whatever you've got, Caleb, be careful. That man's reach in this county is longer than most people know. How long? Long enough that I'm going to hang up now and you're going to call me from a different number next time. The line went dead. Caleb lowered the phone slowly and looked at Elena, and whatever she saw in his face made her sit up straighter. What? She asked. You're not imagining any of this, and you're not alone in it. He sat back down, leaning forward, voice lower now. There's a federal investigator already looking at Walter, which means he knows it, or he suspects it, which is why he's escalating on you right now. He's escalating because he thinks I have Daniel's files. Do you? The question was quiet, direct. No room for anything except the truth. And Elena reached into the inside pocket of her cardigan and pulled out a small silver USB drive. She held it in her palm and looked at it the way a person looks at something they've been carrying so long they've forgotten how heavy it is. I found it 6 weeks ago, she said. In the spine of a book Daniel gave me for our first anniversary. He hollowed it out himself. Her voice broke at the edges of that just slightly. He knew. He knew something might happen, and he made sure I'd find it eventually, because he knew I'd reread that book because it was the one I was reading the first night we met. She closed her fingers around it. I haven't plugged it in. I'm afraid that if I open it and don't understand what I'm looking at, I'll do something wrong and lose the only thing left of what he was trying to do. Caleb was quiet for a moment. Why didn't you go to the police with that? She looked at him. The answer was in her eyes before she said it, and he already knew it, but he needed to hear it. Because the detective who closed Daniel's case in 11 days, his name is Garrett Cross. The silence that followed was complete. Walter's nephew, she said. He's been a detective in this county for 9 years. Caleb sat back. The full shape of it was visible now, and it was larger than he'd expected a web built carefully over years by a man who understood that the best kind of control is the kind nobody sees. Walter Cross hadn't just protected himself from Daniel's information. He had built an entire structure of protection, financial, legal, institutional, layer by layer, until the only thing standing between him and complete immunity was a woman in a gray cardigan sitting on a park bench holding a USB drive the size of his thumb. He's been following you for 14 months, Caleb said. Yes. And he hasn't taken that drive because he doesn't know you have it. If he knew I wouldn't be sitting here. Rex stood up. Not in alarm, just with the quiet authority of a dog who had decided something. He positioned himself next to Elena with his shoulder against her knee, and she looked down at him, and this time her eyes did fill, though she held it back. He likes you, Caleb said. He barely knows me. Rex doesn't need long. He paused. Neither do I. She looked up at him. I know you have no reason to trust me, Caleb said. I know that trust has gotten you nowhere good for the last 14 months. I know I'm a stranger who happened to be on a bench, but I'm also someone with a badge, a dog, and a very personal problem with cases that get closed before the questions get answered. He held her gaze. What do you want to do? She looked down at the drive in her hand. She looked at Rex. She looked at Caleb. And for the first time in 14 months, Elena Marsh made a decision that wasn't about running. I want to finish what Daniel started, she said. The wind moved through the park around them, and somewhere behind them, a child laughed at something, and the world went on the way it always does, completely indifferent to the moments inside it that change everything. Caleb pocketed his phone and stood up. Then we need to move, he said, because Walter Cross did not walk away from this bench satisfied. He walked away to regroup, and men like him don't regroup slowly. Elena stood. Her hands weren't shaking anymore. Rex fell into step beside her without being told, and the three of them left the bench together and none of them looked back. They made it 3 blocks from the park before Caleb's phone rang. He checked the screen. Unknown number. He answered on the second ring and said nothing, just held the phone and waited. A man's voice came through low and measured the kind of voice that had been trained to sound reasonable under any circumstances. Officer Vance, I think we got off to a rough start this morning. Caleb kept walking. Elena looked at him, and he gave her a small shake of his head. Keep moving. I don't recall a rough start, Caleb said evenly. I recall a pleasant morning in the park. Let's not do that, the voice said. We're both adults. You're a smart young man. You have a career ahead of you, a future worth protecting. I appreciate the concern. Elena Marsh is not who she's told you she is. She's a deeply unstable woman who has made false accusations against my family since my son's death. She's been evaluated twice for delusional thinking. Did she mention that? Caleb said nothing. I didn't think so. The voice softened almost paternal. I'm not her enemy. I'm trying to get her help. Real help. If you'd like to sit down and talk man to man, I think you'd see things very differently. I think I see things just fine, Caleb said, but I appreciate the call. He ended it and looked at Elena. He has my number. Her face went tight. He has people everywhere. Then we need to be somewhere he doesn't have people. He thought for half a second. Can you drive? Yes. My car is on Mercer Street, 1 block east. We're going somewhere he won't expect, and we're going right now. She didn't ask where. She just walked. Rex stayed between them the entire way, his stride unhurried, but his attention total. His eyes moving to every doorway and every corner, with the quiet efficiency of an animal that understood its job without needing to be reminded. They reached Caleb's car, and he opened the back door for Rex, who jumped in and settled immediately. Elena got in the passenger seat and pulled her cardigan tighter around herself, and Caleb pulled out of the space and drove without turning on the radio, because he needed to think, and he needed to hear everything around him. Where are we going? She finally asked. My aunt's house. Her name is Margaret. She's 71. She taught school for 38 years. She is the most stubborn person I have ever met in my life, and Walter Cross has absolutely no connection to her whatsoever. He glanced over. She also makes very good coffee, which I think we both need right now. Something crossed Elena's face. It might have been gratitude. It might have been the specific exhaustion of someone who has been running so long that the offer of a chair and a cup of coffee is almost too much to absorb. You're calling in your 71-year-old aunt, she said. She'll be offended if I don't. Margaret Vance lived in the kind of house that felt like it had been holding secrets safely for decades. A narrow 2-story on a quiet street with a porch that creaked in exactly the same way it had when Caleb was 7 years old and would ride his bike there on summer afternoons. He pulled into the driveway and texted ahead, because Margaret always said that only bad news and rude people arrived without warning. She was at the door before they reached the porch steps. Short, sharp-eyed, her gray hair cut close, wearing a green cardigan, and the expression of a woman who had already assessed the situation and formed 3 opinions before anyone said a word. Her eyes went to Elena, then to the bruise on Elena's wrist, then back to Caleb, and everything she needed to communicate traveled between them in under 2 seconds. Come in, she said simply. Both of you. Inside at the kitchen table, with Rex lying across the doorway like a furry barricade, Caleb plugged the USB drive into Margaret's old laptop. His hands were steady, but his jaw was tight, because whatever was on that drive was either everything or nothing, and the difference between those 2 outcomes was the difference between justice and a very powerful man walking free forever. The drive opened. 47 folders, each one labeled with a year going back 11 years. Inside each folder, subfolders organized by facility name, by patient name, by billing code. Spreadsheets cross-referenced with insurance claim numbers. Scanned documents. Emails. And at the very back of the drive in a folder simply labeled, Read First, a video file. Elena's breath caught audibly. Caleb looked at her. Did you know about the video? "No," she whispered. He opened it. Daniel Marsh looked back at them from the screen, and Elena made a sound that was not quite a word, a sound that came from somewhere deeper than language. He was sitting at a desk, speaking directly into a camera, and he looked like a man who was afraid and had decided to be afraid out loud rather than let the fear stop him. "If you're watching this, then I didn't make it to Monday," Daniel said on the screen, his voice steady and quiet. "And if Elena is watching this, I need you to know that I'm sorry. I'm sorry I didn't tell you sooner. I'm sorry I thought I could protect you by keeping you out of it. I was wrong about that, and I think somewhere I always knew I was wrong about that." He paused, looked at the camera with the directness of a man leaving the only message that would ever truly matter. "Everything on this drive is real. Every number, every billing record, every email is documented and verifiable. My father has been defrauding Medicare and private insurance carriers for 11 years across 3 facilities. The total is somewhere above $40 million. The patients are real. Some of them are dead. I don't know how many of those deaths are connected to care that was billed but never given. I couldn't get that far before I had to stop." He swallowed. "I made contact with Agent Sandra Reyes at the Federal Healthcare Fraud Division. Her direct number is in the Read First folder. She knows my name. She's expecting documentation. If I'm not the one who delivers it, please whoever is watching this get it to her." He looked at the camera one more time. "Elena, I love you. I'm sorry. Finish this." The video ended. The kitchen was completely silent. Rex lifted his head and looked at Elena, and she was sitting perfectly still, with her hands flat on the table, and the tears were running freely down her face now. Not the held-back ones from the park, but the real ones. The ones she had probably not let herself cry in a very long time, because crying meant stopping, and stopping hadn't been safe. Margaret reached across the table and put her hand over Elena's. She didn't say anything. She just held it there, and that was exactly right. Caleb was already reaching for his phone. He searched the name. Sandra Reyes, Federal Healthcare Fraud Division. It took him 4 minutes and 2 phone transfers to reach someone who would confirm she existed. It took another 3 minutes to be told she was unavailable. It took him saying, "I have Daniel Marsh's documentation, and I'm calling from a secure location," for the line to go silent for exactly 8 seconds, and then for a woman's voice to come on that was precise and controlled and clearly very awake despite the fact that it was not yet noon. "Who is this?" "Officer Caleb Vance, Mercer County PD. I have Elena Marsh with me. I have the drive her husband told you about." A pause that felt carefully calibrated. "Where are you right now?" "Somewhere private." "How quickly can you move?" "Faster than you'd expect." Another pause. "Officer Vance, I need you to understand something clearly. What you're holding is federal evidence in an active investigation. The moment Walter Cross finds out you have it, his entire focus will shift to you." "I figured." "I'm not sure you have." Her voice was flat and serious. "This man has a county detective in his pocket. He has 3 sitting judges who have ruled in his favor in civil proceedings going back 8 years. He has enough financial insulation to tie this up in court for years if we don't do this correctly." She stopped. "Do not move. Do not contact anyone local. Do not plug that drive into anything connected to the internet. I'm going to give you a number that will connect you directly to my supervisor, and then I'm going to be at your location in under 4 hours." "4 hours is a long time," Caleb said. "It's the best I can do." He looked at Elena across the table. She had stopped crying and was watching him with an expression that was focused and clear, the expression of a woman who had made a decision and was not going back on it. "4 hours," he said into the phone. "We'll be here." He set the phone down and looked at Margaret, who had been listening to all of it, with her hands wrapped around her coffee mug and the expression of a woman filing things away with extreme efficiency. "You should probably tell me what I've gotten myself into," Margaret said. "You haven't gotten into anything," Caleb said. "We just needed somewhere safe for a few hours." Caleb James Vance. She used all 3 names the way she had when he was 8, and had tracked mud through the living room. "Don't you dare manage me. I'm 71, not blind." He almost smiled. A very powerful and dangerous man has been running a large-scale fraud operation that may have contributed to patient deaths. His daughter-in-law has the evidence. We are waiting for federal agents. And yes, there is some small possibility that said dangerous man may figure out we're here before they arrive. Margaret nodded slowly. She looked at Elena. "Are you hungry?" Elena blinked. "I'm sorry." "Food. Are you hungry? It's a simple question." Yes. I think I actually am." "Good." Margaret stood up and moved to the stove. "Then let's not waste 4 hours sitting here staring at the wall. You can talk while I cook, and you can tell me about your husband, and I will listen. And when the federal agents get here, we'll all be better for having eaten something." Something happened in Elena's face. The kind of thing that happens when someone does something unexpectedly, uncomplicatedly kind. "Thank you," she said. "Don't thank me yet," Margaret said. "I cook for comfort, not for presentation." It was 40 minutes later while Margaret was setting plates on the table, and Rex was pretending very hard that he could not smell anything that Caleb's phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number. He looked at it. "We know where you are. Last chance." His stomach tightened. He looked at the message for 2 full seconds. Then he set the phone face down on the table and looked at Elena. She read his face immediately. "What is it?" He didn't answer right away because his mind was already moving, calculating, working backward from the text to figure out how. How did Walter know? Who had seen them leave the park? Who had seen the car? Who had seen the turn onto Margaret's street? And then the answer hit him with the cold clarity of something obvious that he should have seen sooner. His car. He pushed back from the table and walked quickly to the front window and looked down at the street, and there it was on the rear bumper of his own vehicle, a small black disc, no bigger than a quarter pressed flat against the metal. A tracker. Placed while the car sat on Mercer Street while they were still in the park. Walter Cross had not walked away to regroup. He had already been 3 steps ahead before the conversation on the bench was finished. Caleb came back to the kitchen doorway and looked at Margaret and Elena. His voice was very calm, the specific calm of a man who has learned that panic is a luxury and clear thinking is the only currency that matters in a bad situation. "We need to move," he said. "Right now. Bring the drive and nothing else." Elena was already standing. Margaret was already reaching for her keys. "My sister lives 20 minutes from here," Margaret said, completely unruffled. "She doesn't know you exist, she's never met Elena, and she doesn't answer her door for anyone she's not expecting." She was already moving toward the back hallway. "Unless you have a better idea." Caleb looked at her. For a moment, he was 9 years old again, and she was the person who made everything make sense. "No," he said. "That's perfect." Rex was at the door before any of them waiting. Margaret's sister was named Ruth, and Ruth opened the back door of her house before they even knocked, which meant Margaret had already called ahead in the 30 seconds between the kitchen and the car. Which meant Margaret had been thinking 3 steps ahead the entire time, which Caleb filed away as something he should have expected. Ruth was older than Margaret by 4 years, and smaller by 4 inches, and said absolutely nothing as she held the door open and waved them through with the brisk efficiency of a woman who had spent a lifetime not wasting motion. She looked at Rex and pointed at a spot near the radiator. Rex went there and lay down without being told twice. "Phone," Ruth said, holding out her hand to Caleb. He looked at her. "If they tracked your car, they may have cloned your number. Give me the phone." He handed it over. She walked it to the far end of the house without explanation. He heard a drawer open and close. "She used to work for the Postal Inspection Service," Margaret said quietly, as if that explained everything. It explained everything. Caleb borrowed Ruth's landline and called Agent Reyes back with the new location. The call lasted 40 seconds. Reyes didn't ask questions, just confirmed the address and said the timeline hadn't changed. Caleb hung up and stood in the hallway, and breathed for a moment, the first real breath he'd taken since the park. Elena was in the small sitting room, the USB drive in her closed hand, her eyes fixed on nothing specific. She had the look of someone whose mind was moving very fast through a very dark landscape. He sat down across from her. "Talk to me," he said. "I keep thinking about the patients." Her voice was low. Not the money, not the fraud, the actual people. Old people in beds in those facilities who were billed for medications they never got, who were billed for therapies that never happened. She stopped. Some of them died in those beds, and Walter sat at his desk and signed the paperwork and went home and had dinner and slept fine. Caleb said nothing, because there was nothing to say that would make that smaller than it was. Daniel knew all of it, she continued. He'd been living with it for months before he told me, carrying it alone because he didn't want to pull me in until he was sure. And I used to wonder, why didn't he just confront his father? Why didn't he just walk away from the business? And now I understand. She looked up. Because walking away wasn't enough. The patient still would have been in those beds. The fraud still would have been running. He couldn't unknow what he knew. He made the hardest choice, Caleb said. He went toward it instead of away from it. And it killed him. The words sat between them without softening. It didn't finish what he started, Caleb said carefully. You're still here. She looked at him with an expression that was complicated and tired, and something else underneath that was beginning just barely to look like resolve. I'm still here, she agreed. The next 2 hours moved with the specific tension of waiting, which is its own kind of action. Ruth appeared periodically with tea and made no conversation, which was somehow more comforting than conversation would have been. Margaret sat in the corner with a paperback she wasn't reading. Rex slept with one ear up. Caleb thought. He thought about Detective Garrett Cross Walter's nephew, who had closed Daniel's case in 11 days. He thought about the lawyer who had withdrawn from Elena's civil case without explanation. He thought about Daria at the county clerk's office, who had told him Walter's reach was longer than most people knew, and who had hung up fast enough to tell him she was afraid of her own phone. He thought about the tracker on his car placed while he was still in the park, which meant Walter had moved immediately, which meant Walter had not been surprised by Caleb in the park at all. He had been prepared, which meant Walter had been watching Elena long enough to anticipate her movement patterns, to know what park she might stop at, to have people positioned before she even arrived. That realization settled cold and specific in Caleb's chest. He was still thinking through the implications when his borrowed phone, Ruth's landline extension she'd run to the sitting room, rang once. He picked it up. Officer Vance? Reyes. Her voice was different now, compressed with something urgent. We have a problem. Tell me. I ran Walter Cross through our full system an hour ago, standard protocol before an approach. His name flagged an existing federal case out of the Atlanta field office that predates my investigation by 3 years. Healthcare fraud, yes, but also money laundering through a shell company structure that crosses 4 state lines. She paused. The Atlanta case stalled 18 months ago because their primary cooperating witness recanted. Caleb already knew where this was going. The witness. Daniel Marsh, Reyes said. He was in contact with Atlanta before he came to me. He reached out to them first 14 months ago. They were building a parallel case. 3 days before he died, he told his Atlanta contact he was ready to testify. The room tilted slightly around Caleb, the invisible tilt of understanding, arriving all at once, too much at once. Daniel hadn't just been a man who found fraud in his father's company. He had been a cooperating federal witness in an active money laundering investigation. His death hadn't just been convenient for Walter Cross, it had been operationally necessary. His car accident, Caleb said, his voice very flat. Atlanta always believed it wasn't an accident. They couldn't prove it. The county investigation was closed too fast and the physical evidence was never properly preserved. Another pause. There is a very senior person in Atlanta who is going to be very interested in that USB drive. How senior? Senior enough that when I called him 20 minutes ago, he was already on a plane. Something in Caleb's chest that had been coiled tight for hours loosened by exactly 1 degree. How long? He asked. He lands in 90 minutes. I'll reach your location approximately the same time he does. A beat. Vance, I need to tell you something and I need you to hear it clearly. Go ahead. Walter Cross is not going to wait for us. He knows time is running out on something he may not know exactly what you have, but a man who has operated this carefully for this long has contingency plans for his contingency plans. Whatever he's planning to do next, he will do it before we arrive. Caleb looked across the room at Elena. She was watching his face and reading it with the accuracy of someone who had spent 14 months learning to read danger in the expressions of people around her. He kept his voice steady. We'll be ready. He hung up and looked at her and told her everything cleanly and without softening any of it because she had earned the truth and she could handle it, and he was done making the mistake of protecting people from information they had the right to have. She listened without interrupting. When he finished, she was quiet for a moment. He had Daniel killed, she said. It wasn't a question. Atlanta believes so. They couldn't prove it. The drive might change that. The drive changes everything. She nodded slowly, and in her eyes was the particular grief of a thing confirmed that some part of you already knew, but needed to hear out loud before it became fully real. She had spent 14 months being told she was unstable, delusional, a grieving woman who couldn't accept a tragic accident. And now, in a borrowed sitting room with a federal agent on a plane and a USB drive in her hand, the weight of being right about something terrible settled over her with the specific exhaustion of vindication that comes too late to feel like winning. Rex lifted his head. His ears went forward. Caleb was on his feet before he fully processed why. Because Rex didn't lift his head for the wind. Rex lifted his head for people. Ruth appeared in the doorway of the sitting room, and her voice was very quiet and very controlled. There's a car parked across the street. It wasn't there an hour ago. 2 people inside. Caleb moved to the edge of the window without touching the curtain and looked through the narrow gap at the side. Dark sedan, engine off. 2 men in the front. Neither of them was Walter, but the one in the driver's seat was one of the 2 men who had been behind Walter in the park. They knew. Not the address, not exactly, but they'd tracked his movement by some other method he hadn't anticipated, and they were sitting outside and waiting, which meant they weren't alone, which meant they were waiting for a signal, or for reinforcement, or for something that was already in motion that he hadn't seen yet. He turned back to the room. Ruth, is there a back exit? There's the garden gate. Opens onto the service alley. Margaret, you and Ruth go to the neighbor 2 houses east. Don't take your phone. Don't explain anything. Just go inside and stay there. He looked at Elena. You're with me. Where are we going? He thought for exactly 3 seconds, which was all the time he had. There was no point running. Walter's people had found them once and would find them again, and every minute they spent moving was a minute that the evidence was in transit and vulnerable. Agent Reyes was 90 minutes out. The 2 men in the sedan were not moving yet, which meant they were waiting, which meant there was a window and windows closed. So he stopped running the calculation for escape and started running a different one. We're not going anywhere, he said. Elena stared at him. You just said we need to move. I said that before I knew they were already outside. He picked up Ruth's phone. If we run, they follow, and we spend the next 90 minutes in a moving car with federal evidence and no backup. If we stay, we control the ground. He looked at her steadily. I need you to trust me for about 90 more minutes. She searched his face. Then she said, What do I do? Sit down. Hold that drive. Don't open the front door for anyone who isn't wearing a federal badge, no matter what they say, no matter who they claim to be. She sat down. Rex moved to her side without instruction, pressing his shoulder against her knee, warm and immovable. Caleb called the one number he had deliberately not called all day. His sergeant answered on the first ring. "Vance, where in the hell have you been? I've got 3 messages from a Detective Cross saying you've interfered with a family welfare situation, and I've got your patrol car sitting on Mercer Street with no explanation." "Sergeant, I need you to listen to me very carefully, and I need you to not react until I'm finished." A pause. "Go." He talked for 4 minutes straight. Everything. The park Elena, the drive Daniel, the tracker, Agent Reyes, the Atlanta field office, the car outside. He said it all quickly and clearly, the way he'd been trained to report facts in sequence without editorializing. And when he finished, there was a silence on the other end that told him his sergeant was doing what good officers do, processing before reacting. "The request to pull your name came through Garrett Cross," his sergeant said slowly. "Yes. I've been looking at Garrett Cross for something unrelated for about 2 months." The sentence arrived like a door opening onto a room Caleb hadn't known existed. What kind of something? Evidence tampering, small stuff, or what looked like small stuff. A DUI that got quietly dismissed, a property case where the documentation went missing. His sergeant's voice had shifted into the register of a man rearranging a puzzle whose picture had just become clear. "Nothing I could tie to anything larger, until right now." "He's Walter's cover inside the department," Caleb said. "Yes, he is." A beat. "Vance, I'm sending 2 units to your location right now. Not Cross, not anyone in his proximity. People I trust personally." Another beat, and then something Caleb had never heard from his sergeant before, something that sounded remarkably like admission. "I should have looked harder 2 months ago. I'm looking now." "That's enough," Caleb said. He hung up and stood in the quiet of the sitting room, with Rex watching him and Elena watching him, and the full weight of everything that had moved since that morning sitting in the air around him. And he thought about his father, and the truck that ran the red light, and the case that no one had thought to pursue, and he understood in the clearest way he ever had why he'd put on the uniform in the first place, not for the certainty of winning, for the refusal to look away. His borrowed phone buzzed, a text from an unknown number different from the last one. He opened it and read it once, and felt the temperature in the room drop by 10 degrees. It was a photograph. A woman he didn't recognize at first. Older, gray-haired, sitting in what appeared to be a waiting room somewhere. She was looking at her phone and had no idea the picture was being taken. Below the photograph was one line of text. "Her name is Patricia Harlow. She's been looking for her daughter for 6 years. It would be a shame if she never found her." Caleb looked at the name. Harlow. He turned to Elena. "Does the name Patricia Harlow mean anything to you?" Something happened to Elena's face that he had no word for. Something enormous and old and long buried came to the surface all at once, and her hand went to her mouth and her eyes filled so fast that the tears were already falling before she could draw a breath. "That's my mother's name," she whispered. "My birth mother. I was adopted at 3 years old. She's been trying to find me." She looked up at Caleb, and her voice broke completely. "How does Walter know about her?" The answer arrived in Caleb's mind immediately, and it was the most frightening thing yet, because it meant Walter Cross had not just been watching Elena's present. He had been excavating her past, mapping every person who might matter to her. Every person who could be used, every thread that could be pulled to make her come back into reach. He was not just trying to protect himself from the evidence. He was trying to use Elena's own mother as a weapon against her. Caleb looked at her. His voice was steady and deliberate. "Your mother is fine. This is pressure. This is him telling you he can reach the people you love, trying to make you do something fast and afraid." He held her gaze. "Don't do something fast and afraid. That is exactly what he needs." She was trembling, but she nodded. Outside, a car door opened and closed. Then another. Rex stood up. His posture shifted into something alert and absolute. Caleb moved to the window. The two men from the sedan were crossing the street toward the house, and behind them, walking with the unhurried patience of a man who believed he had already won, was Walter Cross. He had stopped waiting, and somewhere in the distance, sirens were beginning to rise. The knock on the front door was 3 slow, deliberate beats. The knock of a man who had never once in his life needed to force his way anywhere because doors had always opened for him. Caleb did not move toward it. He looked at Elena and pointed to the back hallway, and she stood without a word and moved there, the USB drive pressed flat against her palm. Rex gliding silently beside her, like a shadow that had chosen her specifically. Then Caleb stood to the side of the front door and waited, and the knock came again, still patient, still certain. "Officer Vance?" Walter's voice came through the door, smooth and unhurried. "I know you're in there. I know Elena is with you. I'm not here to cause any trouble. I just want to talk." Caleb said nothing. "I'm going to be honest with you, son. I respect what you've been trying to do today. I do. You saw a woman in distress, and you acted. That speaks well of you. But you've been given a very incomplete picture of a very complicated situation, and before this goes any further, I think you owe it to yourself to hear the full story." The sirens in the distance were getting closer. Not close enough yet. Caleb calculated the gap and kept his breathing even. "Elena has a history." Walter continued, his voice taking on the careful weight of someone sharing a painful truth they'd rather not share. "I have documentation from 2 separate psychiatric evaluations. I have letters from Daniel's own hand expressing concern about her stability. I have the affidavits from 3 credible witnesses who will testify to a pattern of delusional accusations going back years." A pause. "Whatever she's told you, whatever she's shown you, I can counter it. And I will counter it. But I'd rather do that in a conversation than in a courtroom because courtrooms are ugly and slow and they cost everyone something they don't get back." Caleb recognized the architecture of it. Every word designed to sound reasonable. Every sentence building a structure of doubt around Elena before a single piece of evidence was ever examined. He had watched Walter Cross operate for exactly 1 day, and he already understood how the man had survived this long. He made people question what they'd seen with their own eyes. He made the truth feel unstable. "Those psychiatric evaluations," Caleb said, his voice clear through the door. "Were they ordered by you?" A pause. Fractional. "They were ordered by her treating physician." "Who was employed by which of your facilities?" The silence that followed was longer than Walter had intended, and in that silence was the first crack that Walter had not controlled. "I'd like to speak with Elena directly," Walter said, and the smoothness had thinned slightly like paint over rust. "She doesn't want to speak with you." "That's not her decision to make. There are legal matters at stake, estate matters that require her direct participation, whether she's comfortable with it or not." "Her attorney will be in touch," Caleb said. "She doesn't have an attorney. Her last attorney withdrew, as I'm sure she told you. What she perhaps didn't tell you is why." Another pause, and the voice dropped, the warmth replaced now with something that had been underneath it the whole time, something precise and cold. "He withdrew because I showed him evidence that Elena had been stealing from Daniel's estate for months before his death. Small amounts, consistent, the kind of pattern that tells a story." He let that sit. "I've been protecting her from that story. I didn't want to use it, but I will use it if I have to." Caleb heard Elena's breath pull sharp from the hallway. He didn't look at her. He kept his eyes on the door. "That's a lie," Elena said from the hallway, her voice shaking with the specific fury of someone who has spent 14 months being rewritten. She came back into the room before Caleb could stop her, and her voice was louder than she'd been all day. "That is a lie, and you have been telling it to every person I've tried to get help from, and I am done letting you tell it." "Elena." Caleb kept his voice low. "Step back." "No." She looked at the door. "Daniel knew what you were, Walter. He documented every piece of it, every patient name, every fraudulent billing code, every dollar you laundered through your shell companies. He kept it all, and I have it. And it is going to a federal agent who is on her way here right now. And there is nothing you can do in the next 10 minutes that changes what happens after that." The silence on the other side of the door was total. And then something shifted in it. Something that was not defeat, not yet, but was the sound of a calculation being rapidly rerun by a mind that had always found another angle, another play, another exit. "Open the door, Elena." The warmth was completely gone now. What was left was the voice underneath, and it was cold in a way that confirmed everything she'd been saying for 14 months. "Open the door and give me the drive, and we can end this quietly. Walk away. I'll drop the estate contest. I'll release Daniel's insurance payment to you in full. You take the money and you go live your life, and none of this has to become what you think it's going to become." "You had my husband killed," Elena said. The words went through the door like they went through everything else in the room. Clean and devastating and final. "You had him killed because he was going to testify against you, and you almost made me believe I was crazy for knowing it." Nothing from the other side of the door. "I'm not crazy," Elena said, "and I'm not afraid of you anymore." The sirens were loud now. Very close. And then there were tires on the street outside, and doors opening, and voices, and Rex made a sound in the back of his throat that was not alarm, but something closer to satisfaction, and Caleb allowed himself to exhale for the first time in what felt like hours. He opened the front door. The two men who had been flanking Walter were already backing toward the sedan, that particular movement of men who understand instantly when the ground has shifted beneath them. Walter Cross stood on the front path, and for the first time all day, he looked exactly like what he was, an old man whose architecture of control was coming apart around him in real time, and finding that the pieces did not go back together. 2 county units. Caleb Sargent, stepping out of the second car, moving with the specific energy of someone who had made a decision and was not revisiting it. And behind the county units, a dark federal vehicle, and from it, a woman in a gray jacket who moved like someone who had been running toward this specific moment for a long time. Agent Sandra Reyes did not look at Walter Cross when she walked past him. She looked at Caleb. "Officer Vance?" "Agent Reyes." She looked at Elena. Her voice dropped to something direct and quiet and human. "Mrs. Marsh, I'm Sandra Reyes. I've been trying to find a way to finish what your husband started for 14 months. I'm sorry it took this long." Elena looked at her for a moment. Then she held out the USB drive. Reyes took it with both hands, and the careful way she held it made clear that she understood exactly what it was. Not just evidence, the last act of a man who had known he was running out of time and had still chosen to do the right thing. Behind them, Caleb Sargent was speaking to Walter Cross in a voice that had lost all of its customary patience. Walter was responding with the reflexive confidence of a man who had always been able to talk his way through reaching for the register of authority that had worked in every room he'd ever stood in. It was not working now. "Walter Cross," Caleb Sargent said. And the words that followed were the words Walter had spent 20 years and $40 million and 1 human life trying to never hear spoken in his direction. Walter said nothing. For the first time all day, he had nothing to say. Rex sat beside Elena and watched it happen with the serene attention of an animal that had been certain of the outcome long before the humans caught up. Elena watched it too. She watched the handcuffs, and she watched the straightening of the silver hair. And she watched the moment Walter Cross was guided toward a county vehicle, and she stood very still through all of it with her arms at her sides and her chin level, and she did not look away. She had earned the right to watch. Reyes appeared beside her. "We're going to need a full statement, tonight if possible while everything is fresh. We'll also need to discuss your own protection during the federal proceedings. Walter has associates we haven't fully mapped yet, and until the case is sealed, we want to make sure you're secure." "I understand," Elena said. "Is there anyone we should notify? Anyone who should know you're safe?" Elena was quiet for a moment. "There's someone," she said slowly. "Her name is Patricia Harlow. I've never met her, but I think I'd like to change that." Reyes looked at her steadily. "We can help with that." Caleb was standing a few feet away, and he heard it, and he looked at Elena, and she looked back at him, and the thing that passed between them, in that look, was not romance, and was not rescue, and was not the simple transaction of a stranger helping another stranger. It was something that happens when two people have stood in the middle of something terrible together and come out the other side of it changed in ways they hadn't expected. She walked over to him. Rex immediately leaned against his leg in greeting, which was Rex's version of acknowledgement. "You didn't have to do any of this," she said. "No," he agreed. "Why did you—" He thought about his father. He thought about a wet intersection and a truck that ran a red light and a case that closed with more questions than answers. He thought about a 9-year-old boy who grew up needing to believe that someone would look for the truth, even when it was inconvenient and expensive and dangerous to do so. "Because someone should have," he said, "a long time ago, for someone else." He looked at her. "Better late than never" runs in both directions. She nodded slowly. Then she looked at Rex, who was watching her with the patient intelligence that had been watching her since the first moment in the park. "He knew," she said. "From the beginning. He knew." "He usually does," Caleb said. She reached down and put her hand on the top of Rex's head, and the dog closed his eyes briefly, the way a dog does when something feels completely right. The weeks that followed were not simple. They never are when the truth is large and the wreckage is wide. The federal case against Walter Cross expanded within the first 10 days to include wire fraud, Medicare fraud across 11 years, money laundering through 4 states, obstruction of justice, and conspiracy in connection with a single vehicle accident on a wet county road 14 months prior. Garrett Cross was suspended from the department pending investigation and indicted 6 weeks later on evidence tampering charges that the Atlanta field office had been building quietly for longer than anyone had known. 3 of Walter's sitting judge allies recused themselves from every pending case connected to the Cross estate. The civil contest over Daniel's inheritance collapsed without the legal infrastructure holding it up. The estate reverted to Elena in full, and with it Daniel's life insurance, which Walter had been blocking through a technicality that evaporated the moment his attorneys stopped returning calls. Elena met Patricia Harlow on a Tuesday afternoon in a coffee shop in the next county, arranged quietly by Agent Reyes and attended by no one except the two of them. What was said in that meeting stayed between them as it should. What came out of it was visible in the way Elena moved through the world afterward, less like someone who had survived and more like someone who had arrived. Caleb went back to work. He filed every report, answered every question from internal affairs with the complete honesty of a man who had nothing to hide and no regrets about any of it. His sergeant told him in the specific gruff shorthand that passed for deep sincerity between them that he had done right. Caleb accepted that and moved on, because that was what you did. On a Saturday morning, 6 weeks after the park bench, Elena came by the precinct. She had a bag of coffee and a folder of paperwork from the Federal Victim Services Office, and she sat across from Caleb in the break room, and they talked for an hour about nothing particularly important, the way people talk when they've already said all the large things and have arrived at the place where small things are enough. When she left, she stopped at the door and looked back. "Caleb." "Yeah. That morning in the park, when I grabbed your arm." She paused. "I didn't know you were a police officer at first. I just saw someone who looked like they wouldn't run." He thought about that. "Good instincts," he said. She smiled, the first full, unguarded smile he had seen from her, and it transformed her face completely. Then she walked out and Rex watched her go, and Caleb watched Rex, and he thought that sometimes the most important thing a person can do is simply be somewhere at the right moment and refuse to look the other way. Daniel Marsh had known what was right and walked toward it. Elena Marsh had carried that knowledge through 14 months of fear and isolation and had not let go of it. And on a quiet morning in Grover Park, a German shepherd had lifted his head, and a young officer had set down his coffee, and a widow had grabbed a stranger's arm, and the chain of small, courageous choices that followed had done what it always does when people refuse to look away. It had brought the truth into the light where nothing that lives in the dark can follow.